A furious scream echoed through the quiet suburban neighborhood. I stepped onto my porch, coffee in hand, watching the chaos unfold with a calm I hadn't felt in weeks. HOA President Karen, the self-proclaimed ruler of our community, stood at the edge of my property, her face red with rage, fists clenched so tight her perfectly manicured nails dug into her palms. But the real show? Her brand new luxury SUV, stranded in the middle of a massive trench that now surrounded my driveway. She looked from the deep pit to me, her voice shrill and desperate. "You can't do this, you psychopath! What the hell is this?" I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Oh, you mean my security modification? Don't worry, Karen, it's completely legal." Her mouth opened, then closed. She was processing, but the gears in her head weren't turning fast enough. She was used to barking orders, not being outplayed. I barely held back a smirk. She had started this war. But she never expected me to finish it like this. 2 weeks earlier, none of this would have made sense. Back then, I was just a regular guy trying to live in peace. I had worked my whole life to afford this house, a beautiful, quiet home in what I thought was a nice neighborhood. I wasn't flashy, I wasn't loud, I minded my business. But that didn't matter to Karen. Because to her, I didn't belong. It started with sideways glances whenever I stepped outside. Then came the HOA letters. First about my lawn being too uneven. Then complaints about the color of my shutters. Petty things, but I played along, fixing whatever they asked, keeping the peace. Until the morning I walked outside to find Karen's oversized SUV parked directly across my driveway. At first I thought it was a mistake. Maybe she had pulled in for a second. But then I saw her, standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed, wearing that smug, satisfied smirk, the kind that said, "What are you going to do about it?" I sighed, forcing a polite smile. "Morning, Karen. You're blocking my driveway." Her grin widened. "I know." A pause. "It's an HOA matter. We've received complaints about your driveway. Until we investigate, I need to keep my vehicle here to prevent any further infractions." I blinked. "Complaints from who?" Her hand waved dismissively. "That's confidential." I turned, looking at my driveway. A simple, clean concrete slab. Nothing fancy, nothing illegal. I looked back at her. "Karen, there's nothing wrong with my driveway." She tilted her head, fake sympathy dripping from her voice. "Unfortunately, the HOA board has the final say. If you have an issue, you're free to file a dispute. But for now, my car stays." And with that, she pulled out a clipboard, jotted something down, and walked away like she hadn't just blocked me into my own home. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about rules. It wasn't about the driveway. It was about power. She wanted me gone. And if she thought I was going to roll over and take it, she had no idea who she was messing with. The morning after Karen blocked my driveway, I tried to stay calm. Maybe this was just another power trip, another petty stunt to remind me who controlled the neighborhood. But deep down, I knew better. I had seen the way Karen and the HOA operated, the way their so-called community standards only seemed to apply to homeowners who looked like me. At first, it was subtle. Cold stares from board members during HOA meetings, patronizing smiles whenever I walked past their perfect little gardens. Then came the violations. First, my grass was too long. I measured it. It was the same as my neighbor's. But I got the fine. Then my trash cans were visible from the street, except every house on my block had their cans in the same spot. Again, only I got the warning. Next, a complaint about my front door being the wrong color. I checked the HOA guidelines. It wasn't against any rule. Still, the fines kept coming. At first, I thought it was just bad luck. Maybe I was making mistakes without realizing it. Until I met Mr. Hughes. He was an older black man, retired, had lived in this neighborhood for almost 20 years. One evening, as I was checking my mail, he walked over, a knowing look in his eyes. "She got you, huh?" he said. I frowned. "Who?" He chuckled. "Karen, the HOA. They've been running this game for years." I stared at him. "What do you mean?" He sighed. "Son, You ever notice how there's barely any black families in this neighborhood? You think that's a coincidence? His words hit me like a gut punch. I looked around, realizing for the first time how few black homeowners were left. They don't tell you outright, he continued. They just fine you, harass you, drown you in so many complaints that you get fed up and leave. And if you don't, they make sure your house doesn't pass inspection. Then they block your loans. Then they find a way to get you out. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just about me. This was a system. And Karen? She wasn't just an annoying neighbor. She was the enforcer. That night I stayed up late doing deep research on our HOA. And what I found made my blood run cold. Over the past 10 years, every single black homeowner in this community had either left or been forced out. Every single one. Many had faced the same harassment I was dealing with. Unjust fines, absurd violations, city inspections out of nowhere. One family had even tried to take legal action, but the HOA buried them in so much red tape and legal fees that they had no choice but to sell their home and leave. And now, I was their next target. But what Karen and her racist HOA didn't know, I wasn't going down without a fight. The next morning, I woke up with one goal: to fight back. I had spent the night collecting evidence, all the fines, violations, and unfair warnings I had received. My plan was simple: file a formal complaint against Karen and the HOA. I drove down to the HOA office, documents in hand, determined to put an end to this nonsense. But the moment I stepped inside, I knew I was wasting my time. Karen was already there, sitting behind a polished mahogany desk, flipping through papers with that smug grin plastered across her face. Beside her sat the other board members, all of them watching me like I was an intruder in my own neighborhood. I placed my folder on the desk. I'm here to dispute these fines and complaints. They're unfair, and you know it. Karen barely glanced up. Oh, which ones? I gritted my teeth. All of them. She let out a fake sigh and skimmed through my paperwork. Well, Mr. Carter, the HOA enforces community standards fairly across all homeowners. I scoffed. Fairly? Then why am I the only one getting fined for things my neighbors also do? She gave me a sickeningly sweet smile. Perhaps you should reread the rules. If you're in violation, that's not our fault. I clenched my fists. Then let's bring in an external mediator. I'll take this complaint to city officials. That was the first time her smile faltered. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, but Karen recovered quickly. She leaned forward. You're free to take whatever legal steps you want, Mr. Carter. But I should remind you, fighting the HOA can get expensive. Are you sure you want to waste your money? It wasn't a warning. It was a threat. I left the office feeling like I had just walked into a rigged courtroom. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules. They were untouchable. Within days, the fines doubled. $500 for failure to maintain driveway appearance. $750 for unauthorized changes to landscaping. $1,000 for non-compliance with HOA standards. I opened my mailbox one evening and found a final notice. Failure to comply with HOA regulations will result in further action, including legal proceedings. I gritted my teeth. They were trying to drown me in violations, hoping I'd either go broke or give up. Then the threats started. It began with anonymous letters, notes left on my doorstep. You don't belong here. People like you lower our property value. Leave before it gets worse. I reported everything to the city, filed complaints, called lawyers. And every time I got the same response. The HOA operates independently. There's nothing we can do. Frustrated, I tried the one thing that should have been simple, getting Karen's SUV towed from my driveway. I called 3 different towing companies. The first one arrived, but as soon as the driver saw Karen's car, he shook his head. Sorry, can't do it. I frowned. Why not? It's blocking my property. He scratched the back of his head. HOA rules say only board-approved tows are allowed. My jaw clenched. Are you kidding me? He shrugged. I'd lose my contract with the HOA if I touched this car. Then he drove off. I tried 2 more companies. Same answer. Karen had locked me into a no-win situation. I was trapped in my own home, drowning in fines, with no one willing to help. It was clear now. This wasn't just about me. This was a system designed to push black homeowners out. And I had only 2 options. Give up or outsmart them. I chose the latter. Because if Karen wanted a war, she was about to get one. Karen thought she had me cornered. Blocked driveway, fines piling up, no way to fight back. That's what she wanted, for me to get frustrated, lose my temper, and break some HOA rules so they could hit me with even bigger penalties. But I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. I wasn't going to get angry. I was going to get smart. That night, I sat at my desk, my laptop glowing in the dim room, and started digging through property laws. If the HOA wanted to weaponize their rules, I was going to turn those rules against them. For hours, I scoured through zoning regulations, HOA bylaws, and city ordinances. Most of it was dense legal jargon, but I kept searching. And then I found it. A single line buried deep in the local property code. Homeowners may implement security modifications on their private property as long as they do not obstruct public access. I read it again and again. Then a smile crept across my face. Karen's SUV was on my property. The HOA had made it impossible for me to tow it. But what if I didn't need to move her car at all? What if I just built around it? I double-checked, triple-checked, even called a lawyer friend to confirm it was airtight. Legally, I had every right to secure my own property, as long as I didn't build a permanent obstruction. That's when the idea hit me. A trench. A massive trench. A modern-day moat that would make sure no one, especially Karen, could ever block my driveway again. The next morning, I made some calls. By noon, a construction crew rolled up in a flatbed truck, carrying an industrial excavator. My neighbors peeked from behind their curtains as workers in hard hats climbed down and fired up the machine. So, within minutes, the ground rumbled as a steel claw tore into the earth. Karen's SUV sat exactly where she had left it, but now the pavement beneath it was being carefully carved away. I wasn't just digging a small hole. No, this was going to be a full-scale defensive trench, 4 feet deep and wide enough that no car could drive across. By sunset, my driveway was completely surrounded. Karen's SUV, stuck in the middle like a maroon ship. She hadn't come outside yet. Not yet. But I knew the moment she saw it, it would be glorious. The next morning, I woke up to furious banging on my front door. I didn't even need to look. I already knew. I opened the door, coffee in hand, to find Karen standing there, her face red, eyes wild, hands shaking with rage. Behind her, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered, all whispering to each other, watching the scene unfold. Karen pointed at the trench, her voice an octave higher than usual. "What the hell is this?" I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Oh, that? It's a security modification. To protect my property." Her eye twitched. "You can't do this. This is illegal." I pulled out a neatly printed copy of the property code and handed it to her. "Actually, Karen, it's completely legal. You see, under city law, homeowners are allowed to make security modifications as long as they don't block public access." She snatched the paper, skimmed through it, and her face paled. For the first time I saw it, the realization sinking in. I had outplayed her. Karen clenched her jaw, her nostrils flaring. "This is not over. The HOA will have this removed." I shrugged. "Well, they better hurry, because I'm not done yet." She blinked. "What do you mean you're not done?" I grinned. "The trench was just phase 1. Next, I'm installing a drawbridge." Karen froze. She looked at me like I had completely lost my mind. You're joking." I shook my head. "Nope, it's already in motion. Since I need a way to access my driveway without obstruction, I'm installing a fully functional drawbridge. It's temporary, so it doesn't violate any HOA regulations. She opened and closed her mouth like a fish gasping for air. I could see the panic behind her eyes. She knew she had lost control. But I watched as her rage turned into something else. Fear. Because now, it wasn't just about her SUV being stuck. Now it was about something bigger. The HOA had spent years pushing black homeowners out, thinking no one would fight back. But I had just proven that their power wasn't absolute. And once the rest of the neighborhood saw what I had done, Karen's reign was coming to an end. She didn't say another word. She just turned and stormed off, practically shaking with frustration. But I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Because Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. No, she was going to retaliate. And I needed to be ready for it. The next morning, I sat on my porch, sipping my coffee, waiting. I knew Karen would come. I didn't have to wait long. A few minutes past 7 a.m., her shiny white SUV came barreling down the street, tires screeching as she pulled up to my driveway. Or at least she tried to. I watched in slow motion as she sped forward, expecting to pull in like she always did. Instead, the front wheels of her SUV dipped straight into the trench. There was a sickening metallic crunch as her car lurched forward, the bumper scraping the dirt. For a split second, everything was silent. Then, "What the hell?" Karen's scream echoed down the street. She threw her car into reverse, but the wheels spun helplessly in the loose dirt. She was stuck. Completely. Permanently. And the best part? It was all her fault. Karen stumbled out of the SUV, her face red, hands shaking with rage. Her wild eyes darted between me, the trench, and the growing crowd of neighbors who had stepped outside to watch. "What did you do?" she shrieked. I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Oh, you mean my security trench? Don't worry, Karen, it's completely legal." Her face twitched. "This is insane. You can't just dig a damn hole in the ground." I raised an eyebrow. "Actually, I can, and I did. City ordinance allows homeowners to implement security measures on their property, to prevent trespassing, like cars blocking driveways." She froze. I could see her brain short-circuiting, trying to find a way out. But there wasn't one. She had spent years weaponizing the HOA rules against black homeowners. Now I had just used real laws against her. And she couldn't do a damn thing about it. Karen wasn't about to go down quietly. She whipped out her phone, jabbing at the screen with shaking fingers. "I'm calling the HOA. This is a direct violation of community guidelines. You are in so much trouble." I shrugged. "Go ahead." A few minutes later, 2 HOA board members arrived, Karen leading them toward my trench like a general bringing reinforcements. One of them, a middle-aged man in a suit, folded his arms. "Mr. Carter, this security modification of yours is highly unorthodox." I smiled. "That's funny because I spoke to a lawyer before I built it. It's perfectly legal. But you're welcome to check." Karen smirked, thinking she had won. "Oh, don't worry. We already have the city coming to inspect this mess." Perfect. An hour later, a city inspector showed up, middle-aged, wearing a hard hat and a clipboard. He walked around the trench, making notes, his expression unreadable. Karen stood next to him, arms crossed, smug as hell. "See? Look at this disaster. This is clearly a violation. I want it removed immediately." The inspector flipped through his notes and looked at me. "Did you pull a permit for this?" I handed him the paperwork. "Filed it last week. Everything's up to code." Karen's smirk vanished. "Wait, what?" The inspector nodded. "It's legal." Karen's mouth fell open. "But he can't. This isn't." The inspector cut her off. "The city has no issue with this. As long as it's not a permanent structure, it doesn't violate any zoning laws." Karen went pale. For the first time, she realized she had no power here. She lost. And I just smiled. Word spread fast. Neighbors peeked from their windows, whispered among themselves. Karen had spent years terrorizing people, fining them, threatening them, making their lives hell. And now, she had been outplayed. One by one, residents started speaking up. Didn't she fine me $200 for leaving my porch light on too late? She threatened to evict my aunt for putting up a Christmas wreath. I heard she even tried to deny a black family's a home loan by manipulating property values. The stories piled up. And suddenly, people weren't afraid of Karen anymore. They were angry. Karen must have realized it too, because her arrogance cracked. She stormed up to me, voice shaking. "You think you're so smart? You have no idea who you're messing with." I leaned in. "Neither do you," because Karen didn't know what was coming next. I wasn't just going to beat her. I was going to expose everything. Karen had lost the battle. But I wasn't done, because I knew something she didn't. This wasn't just about my driveway. This was about how the HOA had been running a racist, corrupt operation for years. And now I had the perfect opportunity to bring it all crashing down. After Karen's meltdown, I spent the next few nights doing what I did best, digging through records. I started with the HOA financial statements. They were public records, but no one had ever bothered to check them. But I did. And what I found made my blood run cold. Massive maintenance fees charged to black homeowners, but not white ones. Fake fines issued for violations that didn't exist. Thousands of dollars taken with no refunds. HOA funds used for business expenses that led straight to Karen's personal credit cards. Karen wasn't just a racist control freak. She was a fraud, a thief, a criminal. And the more I looked, the worse it got. There were emails between HOA board members talking about how certain families didn't fit the community's image. There were property value adjustments, clear proof that the HOA had been manipulating home appraisals to keep black families from building wealth. I even found a formal complaint filed years ago by a black family who had been pushed out through fake violations and illegal HOA liens. They tried to fight back, but the HOA buried them in legal fees until they had no choice but to sell their home and leave. I sat back, staring at the screen, heart pounding. This wasn't just an HOA power trip. This was systemic racism, a full-blown housing discrimination scheme. And Karen was at the center of it all. I could have gone to the authorities, filed a complaint, waited for the system to work. But after everything I had seen, I knew one thing. The system wasn't designed to work for people like me. So instead, I took my story straight to the people. I compiled everything: the fraudulent charges, the racist emails, the manipulated home values, and put it into a detailed report. Then I posted it online. And within hours, it exploded. At first, it started with a few shares. Then, black homeowners from other neighborhoods started commenting. This happened to my uncle's family too. They got fined until they had to move. Our HOA did the same thing. Someone needs to investigate them. How is this legal? This is modern-day redlining. By the end of the day, the post had 50,000 shares. By the next morning, 1 million views. People were furious. Not just in my neighborhood, but across the country. HOA corruption and racism wasn't just my problem. It was happening everywhere. And suddenly the media wanted in. By the next day, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, news stations, podcasts, everyone wanted an interview. How long has this been happening? What do you think should be done about HOA corruption? Are you planning to take legal action? I didn't hold back. I told them everything. And the more I spoke out, the more people came forward. Other black homeowners from different states started sharing their own horror stories. The fake fines, the unfair violations, the housing discrimination. Within a week, the scandal had gone national. Karen, of course, tried to fight back. She held a press conference standing stiffly in front of the HOA office, flanked by board members. She forced a fake, trembling smile. "I am deeply sorry that Mr. Carter feels this way." I nearly laughed. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry she got caught. She denied everything, called me a troublemaker stirring up drama, claimed the HOA treated all residents fairly. Then she made the worst mistake possible. She blamed me. Mr. Carter has been nothing but combative. The HOA only ever tried to uphold community standards. But unfortunately, some people don't appreciate order. That was the final straw. Because by then, the entire country was watching. And nobody was buying Karen's lies. 3 days after her press conference, the city launched a full-scale investigation into the HOA. Inspectors combed through financial records. The police got involved. And within a week, the truth came out. The HOA had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars through illegal fines. Karen had used HOA money for personal vacations, luxury shopping, and private flights. More than a dozen black homeowners had been forced out through fraudulent violations. And now, Karen wasn't just facing community backlash. She was facing charges. The night before Karen's arrest, I stood on my porch watching as moving trucks pulled up to her house. She was packing up, running, leaving town before she could face the consequences. She saw me watching and shot me one last glare. But there was no power behind it anymore. She had lost. I raised my coffee cup in a silent toast as the last of her things were loaded. The HOA was imploding. People were calling for reform, investigations, legal changes. For the first time in years, black homeowners in my community felt free. And Karen, she was just another racist tyrant who thought she was untouchable. Until she met me. The moment Karen's financial crimes hit the news, her so-called allies abandoned her. The same HOA board members who had stood beside her, enforcing her racist policies, were now scrambling to save themselves. At an emergency meeting, the HOA tried to do damage control. Board members, sweating under the pressure of the ongoing investigation, suddenly started pointing fingers. Karen was in charge of the finances. We had no idea she was misusing funds. She ran the HOA like a dictator. We were just following orders. It was pathetic. For years, these same people had turned a blind eye, while black homeowners were harassed, fined, and forced out. Now that the law was breathing down their necks, they were acting like innocent bystanders. But it was too late, because the evidence didn't lie. 2 weeks after the scandal broke, it happened. I was outside, talking to Mr. Hughes, the retired black homeowner who had warned me about Karen, when we saw the police cars pull up to her house. Within seconds, officers were banging on her door. Karen appeared, still trying to keep up the act, her hair perfectly styled, her pearls shining under the sun. But the moment she saw the cops, she lost it. "This is a mistake," she screamed, her voice shaking. "I did nothing wrong." But the officers weren't listening. One of them pulled out a warrant. "Karen Walker, you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and financial misconduct." The neighborhood watched in silence as the woman who had spent years terrorizing black homeowners was handcuffed on her own porch. Her face twisted with shock, rage, and humiliation. She looked around, searching for someone, anyone to defend her. But nobody spoke up, because nobody was on her side anymore. As they put her in the back of the squad car, she finally saw me standing there. And in that moment, she knew. She knew that everything had led to this. She had spent years pushing black homeowners out of this neighborhood. And now, she was the one being forced to leave. The car doors slammed shut. And just like that, Karen was gone. With Karen facing serious prison time, the remaining HOA members knew they were next. The city froze all HOA accounts, launched a full audit, and found even more corruption, fake expenses, illegal fines, and discrimination complaints dating back over a decade. The neighborhood had had enough. A community vote was held, and the results were unanimous. The HOA was officially dissolved. No more ridiculous fines, no more racist policies, no more HOA tyranny. For the first time in years, black homeowners in this neighborhood felt safe. We weren't just tolerated, we belonged. A few weeks later, I stood in my driveway watching as Karen's house was sold at a massive loss. Nobody wanted to live in the house of a disgraced fraudster. So after months of it sitting empty, the bank finally sold it off for a fraction of its worth. And the best part? It was bought by a black family. I smiled as I saw them moving in, a young couple with 2 kids, excited for a fresh start. Karen had spent her life trying to push us out, but in the end, she only pushed herself out. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the victory sink in. For the first time in a long time, this neighborhood felt like home.